Hi, everybody. Welcome to RP Book Club on Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto. If you haven't been with us before, this is Real Progressives. And in a minute, Kami John will tell you more about our organization and our content. For this book club, we're going to listen to the text. This is a short one this week, chapter 2. It's about 23 minutes or so. And then we're going to discuss it. We don't have a teacher or a leader here. It's just us. So, Kami John, why don't you tell them about Real Progressives and our fabulous content?
Well, fabulous it is. We're real progressives. What I like to think is we're trying to find that intersection of MMT, macroeconomic literacy, and class analysis, because it's a crucial combination. Find us on Facebook, Twitter. Our website, realprogressives.org, has a lot of really revolutionary content. Check it out. Feel free to throw us a little donation because we keep the lights on with your help. Got YouTube channels, Real Progressives, Real Progress in Action. So we've got a flagship podcast called Macro and Cheese, and it's great. We've got about 272-ish episodes, and they're all available at the website, realprogressives.org. Put a new one out every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, and help us get the information out there. Then we also do this thing on Tuesday nights where we tape the podcast and we get together, split it up, and we just have a group discussion on it. It's really cool. It's called Macro and Chill. We invite you all to come there and hang out with us too. I don't know, did I forget anything?
I think that's good. Just please remember on Saturday mornings to share Macro and Cheese, the podcast. It's released at 8 a.m. Eastern, and then will be available, forever on all the different podcast platforms and on the Real Progressives website. Please share it immediately, comment, because that helps the algorithms. Yeah. Also on our website, Kami John is saying we have a lot of great resources there. That both the website and the podcast, we have contributions by all sorts of people. They aren't all commies like Kami John or myself. Some of them are just, really just focused on MMT. So really, it's a wide range, but we are about education, and anybody we think has something to contribute, we listen to. So I was just looking for that list, those 10, the list of 10 things that he mentions at the end. Kami John, maybe you can find it. It's on Marxist.org, chapter 2.
Sure can. Yeah. It's my first day.
Yes, it is.
Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. 8. Equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the population over the country. 10. Free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, and etc., and etc. When, in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared, and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character.
For me, maybe the most important part is the part about private versus personal property, because I think that's something that confuses a lot of people. And somebody has their hand raised. Mark, go ahead, Mark.
I just want to make a comment about that last part. Reading that again in the context of what's going on today is just exceptionally meaningful. I hope everybody picked that up.
Well, say more.
Well, you're supposed to do the stretch thing, Virginia.
No, I want you to say more about it. That was very.
No, talking about the parties, as a means for organized power of one class or opposing another. It really just is telling us what we're seeing today, that the political parties are not working for us. They are working for their higher power, which are their big dollar donors. They're not listening to us. They're not doing anything on our behalf. And we're suffering for it. And most people figure that's just the way it has to be. But way back when, it was recognized that didn't have to be that way.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Yeah, the other thing that I was thinking about when I was listening to this was this idea that most of us think of it was the line he said about referring to the bourgeoisie as revolutionary. At the time, at the end of feudalism, the bourgeoisie was a revolutionary class. And I think that's really important. And I think about the way that we were all taught history, which was just a series of events. And I know people who refer to, various history books or lectures as just straight history, not political, just straight history, just the facts. And it's never that. And one of the things that I think is always emphasized, or rather de-emphasized, is the economic nature of what drives history. We think it's about ideas, even religion. We think that it's the religious ideas that move society, when the religious ideas and the revolutionary religious ideas, again, come out of their time, come out of their context.
We've got a guest, Steve Groom-Bean. Got to stand up. You want to go ahead and unmute?
Well, for those people who aren't familiar with us, Steve is the founder and leader of Real Progressives and the host of Macro and Cheese podcast.
The Big Cheese, we call him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is the hardest part of this whole book for me to get my head wrapped around. I've tried a million times, but one of the things that I want to share with you all, because some of the stuff when you hear it the first time is a little shocking. Doing away with the family, what the heck do you mean? And doing away. And one of the things that is both important and scary is when you think about doing away with countries and doing away with these things. These things create us versus them scenarios. And when you think about people that have a little bit of money, they may be sympathetic to the plight of those without money. But when push comes to shove, they're going to protect their money and they're going to protect their family at the it doesn't matter if it burns your society down. In the end, they're going to place their own over top of the good of all. And so you can see that everywhere, because it's like the minute you tell people, oh my God, we're witnessing a genocide right here, right now, they immediately say, well, how will this impact my life? And so I think it's worth noting that you have to start thinking of the good of all. And by extension, everybody doing that, they're putting your family first too, right? It's not like, so it's kind of a different thing there, right? And I think it's such a paradigm shift that it can be shocking and hard to understand what they're talking about there. I mean, mothers still give birth, fathers still father, so on and so forth. But the idea of having that collective will and not having to be in competition to survive, taking away the antagonisms. And for those that enjoy that kind of competition, I get to win, you get to lose,
Mm.
you see where that got us, right? Look at what we're dealing with right now. Bravo. I hope it was everything you ever dreamed it would be. But for me, even though it's hard to get my head wrapped around, like, there's nobody saying that you have to, eat this whole cake in one bite. But I think it's worth noting that you have to consider why we are where we are. And I think these are some of the awakenings that I've had through this journey. That's all.
Yeah, no, I think it's, this idea of, he refers to, or they refer to it as 9/10, and we always call it the 99%, at least ever since, was it David Graeber who started talking that way? But the fact that if you don't own it, you are a member of the working class. And that's very hard, certainly for me to wrap my head around, because there are people who definitely identify their interests with the ruling class more than with the working class. So, yeah, I have trouble with that.
Yeah.
From
We've got a
those-
couple in the Q&A, but real quick, Kimrad was asking me something related to that. She wasn't
Oh,
sure
okay.
what constitutes, where, if you're proletariat or bourgeoisie, or at what point, or
Mhm.
at what point are you a capitalist, acting in your own class interests? And, I probably gave her a big convoluted, not very clear answer. If anybody would like to explain it further. And actually, I'm going to read one of the Q&A here real quick.
Okay.
So Christopher Landry, thanks for coming, sir, asks, I wonder how technology has changed since this has been written, and how it affects the list of what revolution looks like in the advanced societies, in particular, the heavy focus on agriculture in that list. Yeah, that's that dialectical materialism. And as conditions change, and Steve's got his hand up to save the day. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, I just got done talking with Arn Mentoni a couple hours ago. And, Arn brought up the fact that AI, and not in the way that we think necessarily, but AI is here to stay, and it's been here for a long time. And AI is rewriting the disciplines that we're dealing with. It's rewriting the rules. They're using AI to literally launch weapon attacks in Gaza right now.
Mhm.
The test bed, if you will, for the information technology testing of these weapon systems is happening with AI in a live field with real bodies falling on the ground as they get killed. And the idea of AI doing many of the jobs that we're used to doing, or more importantly, deciding who may be a criminal, who may not be a criminal, who could be a criminal, who to watch out for, who to put on the list to look out for. Oh, this just got re-upped. The espionage stuff, it's just disgusting. Bush era laws have been continually re-upped by the good guy Democrats. And I say that with my tongue in my cheek firmly.
Mm.
And one of the things that is extraordinarily frustrating is when you have people that really can't learn new information. They literally cannot learn new information. They will not learn new information. They're going to stay stuck in something 30, 40 years old, when we're dealing with something very real right now. And this is why the gentleman's question is so important, because imagining what work is today and what we, the people, are today versus what we, the people, were yesterday, is very different. This is why it's important to understand dialectical materialism. It's important to understand the material conditions of the time in which you live. And if you choose to stay stuck 30 years ago, you won't understand the real struggle that's going on today. And I'll say the same thing in 10 years from now. If you stay stuck on today, 10 years from now, you're not solving today's problems. You're solving some other problem that probably already is irrelevant. And what's happening is that we're inundated with disinformation, and that disinformation is generated by AI. A lot of AI articles being written out of nothing, just synthesizing information they find on the internet and calling it news and repurposing it and changing a few words and stuff. And if you watch on Twitter, you can see how simultaneously every single one of these disgraceful Zionist supporters out there that is part of our quote unquote faith Congress tweets the exact same message at the same time as if they came up with an original idea. But what it looks like is unplugging from this disinformation system, not allowing somebody who slightly supports this system as it is to influence the way you think, to literally shut down their influence on you and not allow them an inch to influence you when it comes to what you're seeing. Because the problem is that there's people that aren't disciplined enough to pull away from the propaganda, who fancy themselves smart, but all they do is source around with normie sources that are polluted by this kind of taint that I'm discussing. So what does revolution look like tomorrow? I think right now a real revolution is a mental one. Breaking free of the system and breaking free of your mind to believe that the system is producing the things you thought it would produce, when it's clear that it's not producing. Believe your lying eyes. You're not seeing any progress whatsoever. Believe your eyes. And so revolution to me starts there, because you can't have any, and it's such an incredible thing, because the weapon of their war is disinformation. The weapons are financial. The weapons are, means of production, and how they keep, they won't give you things because they know that if they give you things, you won't be desperate. And if you're not desperate, you can't be controlled. And if you can't be controlled, then you're no good to them. And then you take it a step further, we're hearing all this stuff about how climate crisis is bearing down on us at such a severe rate. And there's all kinds of evidence of climate change everywhere you look. But the more you understand, the more you realize, well, why aren't they changing? Why aren't they doing something different if this is the case? And let me tell you something. The minute we stop being useful to the rich, and I'm not talking about your friends and have some money and drive some nice cars. I'm talking about the people that really own the means of everything, that own literally own the power. Okay. So just remember what I'm speaking of, and don't pervert what I'm saying. Only deal in the words I speak, not the ones I don't speak. When you know that, and you realize that we could be wiped out instantly, that they're testing these weapons in Gaza as a means of showing, hey, this is what we can do. You guys better not step up for Cop City. You guys better not step up for any of these other things. You guys better not go march. So you look at the brutalization going on in New York City right now as people protest Genocide Joe. And there's people out there that will defend genocide. Oh, what else could he possibly do? Oh, Trump will be worse. That's not the point. I don't care. I'm not thinking of a duopoly. Some people can't break their head from that. The next guy that supports genocide, I'll be against him too. But I will never allow someone to defend a genocide and get away with it. So this is, to me, revolution. That is revolution. Just not allowing some freaking smooth brain to deter you from seeing the truth for what it is. Resisting at all costs the lies that come at you. And I think part of our resistance will be to create an information network, part of this parallel systems I've been talking about forever, that allows us to funnel information so that we are not inundated with the lies that keep burying us. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on what you asked. I thought it was a good question.
Thank you. Before we get to Cheryl's comment, Carlos, welcome. It's so nice to have you here. I don't know if people are familiar with Steve's interview with Carlos and his book, Fiat Socialism. And actually, we're going to ask him to do a webinar on that book to introduce everyone to it shortly. But Carlos mentioned in the chat item number 4 on the list, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. And I'm thinking of Cuba, for example, or it's not just immigrants, but it's confiscation of the property of the ruler. Anyway, Carlos, you want to talk about that if you're able to unmute?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful webinar. Yeah, and it's a pleasure. I hope to come more often to this kind of meetings. It's very interesting. No, I pointed number 4 because you were talking about the abolition of countries, and he talks about immigrants, And in that list, it always strikes me different things. For example, uh, point number 1 seems to imply that we need rents, or we need tax in order to finance public spending. So there you have the gold standard, right? That is very striking. And also very striking is, for example, when he talks about equal liability of work to all. This is very clearly, a reference to the job guarantee versus universal basic income. He was in favor of the job guarantee, and he wouldn't have proposed a universal basic income, even though he talks about the centralization of credit in a central bank, which is extremely interesting. So these are the things that always strikes me. He in number 4, he talks about what we would talk today about, like capital controls. He is clearly in favor of capital controls. So these are the things that are difficult to ignore when you are reading these 10 points, because what he really says is that these 10 points is communism. So he's very clear on that, and he is very honest and say, well, what is communism? These 10 points. So that is, in my opinion, the big legacy of Marx, that he's very honest. And then he says, well, what do we want? This is what we want. Yeah. And I think it's a very powerful document to work on.
Thank you. Yeah, that's why we're doing it. Everybody who's serious about social change needs to have read it, needs to understand capitalism, needs to understand our own system. Even if you don't think you're a socialist, the more you learn about our system, the more anti-capitalist you're going to be. And MMT is a crucial tool in that. Steve always says MMT radicalizes people. But actually, let me just say one thing. It's funny because, Steve, you're talking about AI, and AI is, it's part of what they're using to keep us all stupid. You talk about the people who hold on to wrong thinking for decades. That's why they surround us. It's the media, it's the education, it's everything. It's a miracle any of us get past it. And I think we're lucky and privileged to have done so. But when about AI, when I first learned about ChatGPT, and I was blown away, and I was sort of playing with it, and I entered explain MMT, and what turned out was a very nice, basic, bland explanation of MMT, but it left out any class content. It left out any acknowledgement that, it only looked at it from a very, very narrow point of view. It left out any acknowledgement that when the government releases money into the economy, most of it isn't going to us, the public. Most of it is going to the finance capitalist class. And so I had to go back and enter, okay, now explain MMT from a Marxist class perspective. And then it came closer to something that the kind of thing that we talk about here. But anyway, yeah. So even in that respect, AI it's like, who is it serving? Like anything else, who is it serving? The central bank, people who say the central bank is bad. No, it's about who is it serving. Not that a central bank will always serve a particular class interest. It's today's central bank is serving particular class interests. Anyway, thank you, Carlos. John, you want to read Cheryl's comment, please?
Absolutely. Good friend of ours, CVE, asks, if the people were to revolt and take over power, how do we keep those in power well-grounded, oriented to the people, not the influences of the capitalist party? And again, that's one of the things that the libertarians and right wingers like to use. They say, "Oh, communism is just different guys getting into power and being the dictator, powerful guy." And the thing, man, it just, I guess I think if you've got an organized proletariat, there wouldn't be that, idea of, "Oh man, we're gonna get in, then we're gonna become the dictator and get rich ourselves." I just think that, to that point, when you've got an educated proletariat that's organized for the common goal, I think that's one of the first things that withers away is that idea that, we're on a quest for power, or we're somehow getting political power or wealth or whatever is, some kind of even goal on the list. That's just my opinion.
Well, we love your opinion around here. Cheryl also made a comment about the data that the system uses will be chosen to support their premise, their policies, their practices. And my sister is a sociologist, and I always found it very sort of dry and uninteresting. It's sort of collecting, statistics, basically. She was actually working on AIDS in Africa, the sociological angle. How changing practices, how people educated themselves about AIDS protection, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's not the point. The point was, as a sociologist, she would always jump on us at, family gatherings. Somebody would make a comment about, some statistic from the newspaper. This is 75% more likely to happen. This is and she would always ask these penetrating questions. If something is 70% more likely to give you cancer, well, it's if there's, well, she would always ask, what is the base number? If it only gives, 0.01% of the people cancer, then 70% of that is, or 70% higher. I'm bungling this, guys, but I hope you know what I mean. The statistics they give us on the news, as Cheryl said, are used to promote particular policies, particular points of view, and we aren't taught how to think scientifically, so we don't question them. We just accept them. So do we have any other
Well, so Kimrad's in here. I'm trying to needle her into turning her mic on to ask herself, but I think she put it in the chat somewhere. I guess her question was kind of like what do you have to, and we were chatting about it kind of, and where like the classes are, and like the petty bourgeoisie, and like kind of the, not necessarily the, the bourgeoisie or proletariat, and I guess she was kind of wondering, at what point do you become a capitalist? What do you have to own to be a capitalist? I guess, and I don't know. It's there's a lot of the longer conversation, but I guess she was just curious about you know where are you at on the economic scale? At what point are you now a capitalist and fighting for your class interests? I guess.
Hmm.
Oh, Mark Fabian's got his hand up. Maybe.
Well, aren't we all capitalists because we have to survive in a capitalist, economy? It's the situation that we find ourselves in. So we no matter what our personal beliefs are, until we can unionize, together as citizens, we're all capitalists.
I guess
you're earning a paycheck, you're a capitalist.
I guess she meant more of when do you become a capitalist and
or when do you
fighting for
become
your class.
bourgeois?
Yeah, like when do you become what do you have to acquire? At what point are you now fighting for the bourgeois interests over, I guess, or what, when you're in that class? So now
It has to do with people. Yeah, it has to do with people working for you. But there's also, Marx had a category, the petty bourgeoisie,
Yep.
which is the sort of the mom and pop,
like the middle class,
where you have employees, but you also work. So there's that middle ground. But
I guess I told her something to that effect, like you're the mom and pop business, like what they would call middle class, maybe. But the problem is like you think you're bourgeoisie, but like Walmart and Amazon comes in and monopolizes everything and wipes you out.
Right.
I guess at that point now you're proletarian for sure. Either way.
I remember once learning that you can't trace the petite bourgeoisie more than 2 generations. They were either working class and somehow managed to move up and gain some means of production, or they were once the bourgeoisie and got screwed during a depression or recession or something. I don't know if it's true, but I remember reading that somewhere.
We got Jonathan and Jules with their hands up. I think Jonathan got in there first, but
go ahead, Jonathan.
Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I wanted to say something on the family part of it because Virginia, I'm sure you remember when Birian had us read Engels' History of the Family,
right?
And he was very preoccupied with it. I'm pretty sure that was his contribution to the manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
And he, again, in his so-called study of this, used a lot of like fake anthropology, which he got to. That was a popular thing to do at the time. But while it's interesting to think about the ways in which, these kinds of structures of oppression and commodification have made their way into family relations, they are not the origin point of it. In fact, we have a lot of psychological research nowadays that says it's hardwired into our nature to a certain degree, into our neurology. And in fact, we had a great interview with Stephanie Preston. I can't even remember how long ago that was now. She was giving an example of a way in which that psychology is actually used to extend the notion of family and kin selection to create a sense of solidarity with people that are not related to us. And at the end of the day, these kinds of connections we have to our familial unit are, in a sense, the origin point of our ability to empathize and have solidarity with people that are not in our family unit. So in that particular sense, he may have been advocating against his own purpose in that particular way, and trying to throw the baby out the bathwater. I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Indeed it was, sir. Jules, go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I just wanted to kind of chime in on what Virginia was saying about the sort of like the petty bourgeois, where they can't trace it back more than 2 generations or whatever. And I think some of that is part of like what the whole Bacon's Rebellion and stuff like that is, where, you know, they all feel like, oh, embarrassed millionaires or whatever, like they're just one step down from like the big dogs, but really they're not. They're literally like 1 inch above the pigsty or whatever it is that Steve says. But they have a little bit more. So then they have this like loftiness about themselves that they feel like they're somehow better. And it's given to them on purpose, right? Like by the the heavy hitters, right? And they allow a certain amount of people to like, have a better life than the rest of the 90%. To sort of protect themselves. I mean, I think that whole sort of system of middle class or whatever you want to call upper middle or whatever, petty bourgeois or whatever you want to call it is there on purpose to keep distance between the real power and the rest of us. That's all.
Oh yeah.
And this sort of law of capitalism, that there are always going to be crises. Again, that's what happens every couple of generations. There's going to be an economic crisis that will knock people out their position and elevate some people. We've all talked about disaster capitalism, taking advantage of crises, whether natural or economic. We have a couple of people who chimed in the chat to explain bourgeoisie. Do any of you actually want to unmute and speak? We have Bob Lior and Al Ronzoni. Do either of you want to speak?
In the meantime, we've got a guy named, or a person named Aiden Peters. I hope I pronounced that right. You can go ahead whenever.
This is my first time attending this book club, this reading club. So it's awesome you guys are doing this. And I thank you for that, for putting this together. I recently discovered this organization. It seems awesome. So thank you guys for everything you do. Now, in regards to your question earlier that, you have to, it was a question, along the lines of where do you draw the lines between a bourgeoisie and a proletarian, or a capitalist and a laborer, or whatever. Often practically we have to treat things as binaries, right? And we have to categorize things. But in reality, things very rarely actually exist in binaries, right? And so then you get a pragmatic question of, well, what do you do for someone who maybe doesn't own a lot, but certainly acts as bourgeoisie, I guess, right? And you can call them petty bourgeoisie, but then even there, right, there's gray margins, right, of which of those petty bourgeoisie. So yeah, I think it's I don't think you can get a concrete answer, but John, you said you gave a long-winded answer, and I'd be quite interested because I don't think there would be an exact boundary, but that would have to be a judgment call made on an individual level. Plus, like, it comes down to ideology and how that person behaves first and foremost, whether or not they're petty or actual,
Yeah. You get a little bit of privilege. You want to hang on to it. Probably going to be fighting for the system to stay as is.
I worked in the entertainment business most of my career. So I met a lot of extremely wealthy celebrities. Many of them didn't own the means of production. They were at the mercy of the studios, of the, whoever financed their films. But boy, it would have been hard to tell that they certainly didn't behave like proletariats. So that's a very subjective, I guess. Bob put in the chat, unless you want to raise your hand and talk about it yourself, but this is a quote: "By bourgeoisie is meant the class of modern capitalists, owners of the means of social production and employers of wage labor. By proletariat, the class of modern wage laborers who, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor power in order to live. That's it at its most fundamental level. And in our society, with all these sort of gig workers and what are they? What are I know I have a niece who she and her husband bought a house when real estate was good, and now they're living off of the Airbnb rentals. So what are they? I guess they're petty bourgeoisie, but it's such a complicated society now.
And what about like celebrities, and like
Yeah,
actors or something that are, a wealth of privilege and, economically
sports
secure, but
athlete.
they don't
Yeah.
really, they don't own a factory or anything.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Very gray area.
Will run a lot of companies, though. I tell you, I watched the
True.
show earlier of Austin Eckler, who is a football player, talking about the corporation he started that is a software company that bridges the name and likeness for college athletes to prepare them for NFL stardom as well. And so all these guys have lots of money. And what do they do with lots of money? You think they just buy bonds and stuff like that? No, they become CEOs suddenly out of nowhere, and they become. So this is kind of how, somebody who maybe was poor suddenly enters into the bourgeoisie, and then, it jumps class, and it's like, see, it can happen for you too. And there's like 0.0000001% of people that fit that bill. But, yes. And that's where that whole temporarily embarrassed millionaire thing comes from. So I'm sorry. I think we sometimes forget what those individuals do with their money, right? It's not just like, and all of a sudden they start talking in terms of, inspirational, entrepreneurial, and yes, to maximize profit and to this, that, and the other. And you need the right people, and you need going from good to great, and on and on and on. And it's really the shift from, and this is the MBA program and everything else. It trains up a whole new crop of people seeking to maximize somebody else's efficiency. And when they aren't efficient enough, turn them into a robot and get rid of them. So anyway, I do think that they do become that kind of petty bourgeois, and in some cases, the bourgeois.
Al's comment is, I always thought the definition of capitalist is someone who can live off their capital, their profits, etc. Someone who doesn't have to sell their labor. And again, that's a real sort of fundamental definition. And many members of the capitalist class go to work. So it's not that they're, diving in their big, like Scrooge McDuck, diving in their big pile of gold coins every day, but it's a different kind of labor. It's because they have a different relationship.
Well, how about this, Virginia? What if the idea here wasn't just that, it was also the idea of, what if hypothetically they lost their job? Would they ever go without food? Would they ever go without health care? Would they ever go without any of these things? And reality is they have millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to live on and never have to do productive labor again. So I think that there's a fundamental difference there too, because, what do they do with their money? How do they keep it? They invest it. They become a capitalist by investing that money and owning capital, and it grows in interest. So there's a definite difference, but what that difference is and what that distinction is, I think is, actually, I'd be very interested in Carlos's response to that, if he's listening.
Saying that, absolutely. And one other thing, Steve, is I keep thinking about this whole financialization of capital. Because the people you're talking about, even if they stop working, they're never going to, they are living off of financial capital at that point. People don't just have a big savings account. It's always invested. It's always they're always collecting quote unquote rent, as Michael Hudson talks about. Carlos, can you
I
unmute?
don't believe he's with us anymore,
Oh, okay. Well,
but still the time. Maybe he'll come back. Kim Radsinger has a question.
Everybody always freaks out when they talk about taking their property. So I asked John, like, what property would we take from them? Like, if they are rich and they have 10 houses, they get to keep the house in the state they live in, and we take the other houses, and blah, 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 blah. So he tried to explain it to me. So if anybody wants to, I'm okay with it, but I just thought maybe anybody would want to know that isn't usually here, whatever. I don't know.
yeah, again, it's the difference between personal property and private property. Does anybody want to answer that? Where do you differentiate when you're talking about the capitalist class? I mean, I know that in socialist countries that did have a socialist revolution, a lot of that property was confiscated, even though it wasn't just the factories and in particularly poor countries, people who had huge, many homes or a lot of land, while there were other people homeless. There, I guess it would be defined as personal property, but it was confiscated anyway. But I'm wondering if there's somebody who can speak to it more.
Well, what John told me, it was like anything that makes them money.
Well, I kind of how it was like let's say somebody that owns 10 houses, as Kim Rad suggested. I mean, well, first I said, well, as we start implementing a more socialist economy, it's like we're going to have housing for everyone. So like somebody that owned a bunch of properties and they're not going to really be able to rent them out to people or whatever. But yeah. And again, I'm not opposed to taking them and tossing my gulags. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's like a whole reorganization of like society and the economy, to where I just can't imagine somebody who would just be like, well, I can just keep, accumulating houses, and somehow
but that's hoarded wealth. I misunderstood. I thought she meant the kind of penthouses that people live in, those kind of those kind of ultra luxurious living quarters. But yes, landlords, absolutely, their property would be confiscated. Absolutely. If you're not using it, and and these are just what, investment properties? I mean, yeah.
vacation homes and such. Yeah. Again, man, it comes with like that organized, like, understanding of what we want society to be like,
Wait a minute. Vacation homes that's something different.
That's what I meant by that, Conrad. I meant like these rich celebrities or these rich people that own, their personal house, also their vacation houses, their mistresses' houses, blah, 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 blah. We take that away from them.
Again,
I guess
ownership becomes something a little different.
Again, I think if it's about collecting rent on these things, that's where I think you would differentiate. But yeah, it's these things all have to be worked out. I doubt that we'll be working it out tomorrow, but yeah. Mark mentioned the dachas in the Soviet Union. Everybody had access to a dacha for a certain number of weeks every year to take their family on vacation. Dacha is a country house or a beach house or a hunting cabin or whatever. And so, yeah.
That's what, as the revolution carries on. It's not like we're going to, burn down Jeff Bezos's yacht or something. It's like, we're going to, let everybody use it.
Use it for transportation if you want to. I don't know. But again, all of these things, it's complicated. This isn't 1917. And so we're going to be faced with all kinds of different questions. Right now, we're still living in a world where people are completely brainwashed and completely supporting the system we live in on so many different levels that we have our work cut out for us just teaching people about the reality of the system they're living in, much less what we want to transform it to.
Yep. That's why the education and getting everybody on the same page is so important. And understanding MMT and realizing that, it, it doesn't take from one to give to another kind of thing. It's like we have an abundance. We can organize things right. We can make it work.
Right. Dominique asked, can we say if rent is not collected, then they can keep their property? I don't know. That's kind of how I feel, but maybe I'm too squishy about this stuff. It's for me, it's about exploitation. If you're not exploiting other people, I can't imagine how you could be that wealthy and not be exploiting other people. As Steve said, even the celebrities and the athletes and, they're exploiting other people too. Most of them do own some kind of business, or they
It's
have
like,
some.
how did you accumulate all that property? How did you get this? It wasn't like you built it yourself from the ground up. It's like there's some exploitation involved, and I think that's what we'd be eliminating. I think a lot of the, the smaller time, the more petty bourgeoisie, I think once they see what starts happening, I think they'd be more than happy to relinquish their 7th and 8th, whatever.
We have an interesting episode of Macro and Cheese on Georgist, the Georgist tax policy, land value tax, that people should listen to, because it's a different way of looking at people who own land that they're not using or not occupying. Well,
I just saw Mark Fabian put his hand up, and we're calling on him because we're.
Go ahead, Mark.
We'd gone on to another thing. I just wanted to mention that, and I know it's Hollywood, but there was an old movie, Dr. Zhivago, based on the novel. And it showed after the revolution where the wealthy with their mansions of many rooms, where the people that were homeless and, needed a place, were moved into those places to take up the spaces.
Right.
So,
but it's interesting because, again, the socialist revolutions up to this point have been in countries that were fairly poor, that weren't that developed. And so they, gosh, we have such an abundance of housing today. The reason for homelessness here has nothing to do with the lack of housing. It's again, it's another tool to keep us, scared and oppressed and competing with each other. We'd have to find very different solutions today, and a very different approach, I would think.
But the same problems, though, we have the same problems that those were addressing. We have homeless in capitalism. In fact, it seems like that's a feature of capitalism, is to have poverty as a whip to labor.
Yes.
And it's interesting too, with Karl Marx and his idea of guaranteed jobs, which the Soviet Union, as I remember, they had that until the wall went down.
Yeah.
Everyone was guaranteed a job. And I think that from friends that I had way back when, I think that you applied for a job based on what your experience or your skills were. So it was a little different than just community work. They actually were using these people in, regular jobs. So we have a homeless problem, and we have plenty of empty buildings and houses. And we have plenty of people that are continually unemployed, and we still don't have a job guarantee. So
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
Capitalism working as designed.
Exactly. It's not a glitch.
And was I the only one? Didn't anybody pick up on? There was a feminist angle to this chapter that I kind of grasped, or what, am I, reaching for something that isn't there?
Nope. No, you got it, man. They definitely touched on, how in a capitalist patriarchal nightmare like we live in,
Mhm.
women are looked at as, property,
Yeah.
means of production in a way.
And
Yeah,
that
I saw the whole thing of this chapter, especially where it's an excoriation of uh, bourgeoisie in their families, the way that they look at their wives, raise their children, educate. It's excoriating them because none of that was available to everybody else.
Mhm. Dominique has their hand up. Okay, Dominique, you can unmute yourself if you wish.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank
Yeah.
you for allowing me to be part of this session because I'm really looking for solutions. Regarding the Communist Manifesto, I did read it. Maybe I have to admit I read it just once. Maybe I need to go back and read it again because sometimes when you read it the first time, you may miss things and stuff like that. But like just in terms of like the properties, because I think this is where there is a lot of challenges, especially for those who are all call themselves the so-called capitalist. One of the things that you're saying is, well, we need to be able to own certain properties and so forth. But in the Communist Manifesto, please correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstood. My understanding is everybody would be allowed to have their personal property. What they were going after was the notion and the concept of private property. And my understanding of the concept of private property is that it's where there's like some sort of quote unquote exploitation, rent, and so forth that comes out of it. I guess I'm just asking and inquiring into should we go if I'm understanding it right, should we focus on the letter of what Communist Manifesto is presenting, or is there something else I'm missing? That's my question. Thank you so much.
I think that's a great question. Does anybody have any response to that?
First, I would say absolutely not. Should we go by the letter of the Communist Manifesto? I think Marx would be the first one to tell you that. But yeah, and I guess to her specific question, I mean, and again, I don't know if it's necessarily about taking away, but just about, being able to hold on to it, because there's a lot of, misconception about the idea that, the government's going to control everything, take everything away and give you, one toothbrush for your whole community or whatever. It's more about, you know, you no, we don't mean collectivize your car to where we're all going to use your car every day, or collectivize your house and we're going to come party at your place. It just means that, the means of producing, the goods and services, the gooder services in, society, and to make life possible, that shouldn't be controlled, and be decided, on distribution and what gets produced by, a few rich people, and saying that those things will be collectivized and ran at, public good, I guess. That's
Can
what
we say it's profit producing? If so, the state would take over on behalf of the people anything that produces profit, and that's what I think last week I mentioned that when I first was reading Marx and Lenin, I always thought of capitalism as factories. The bourgeoisie are the rich guys with the silk black hats, and the proletariat were the guys with lunch boxes lining up outside the factory every day. And it's what we were talking about earlier. It's become so much more complicated than that. And especially the focus on rentier, on the rentier class, that people who are making money not necessarily from the labor of others, but through accumulated wealth, kind of through this weird casino system we have of finance capitalism. So, I think a lot of a lot of our ideas need to be modernized when it comes to all of this.
Sure. Can I interject if it's all right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you. So if it's our focus is, I'm putting it out there. It's the first time that I've been meaning to join this group, but I've had other things. But if we're focusing on the means of production, I guess my question is, how does having a second beach home impact the means of production? Because what we're really focusing on is like and I'm not saying I'm for or against beach homes. That's not what I'm saying at all. I guess my focus is like, how does having a second home by the beach or on the mountain impacts more one way or another means of production? And then also, one of the things I've been trying to do is I think I'm really being convinced by modern monetary theories. Isn't there a way for, as well as like a solution to those who have like just a general house where they live in the second or third house, to just tax them out of their life of like those second or third properties, so that there's another way of putting in place that control? I guess this is my first question: is how does having a second home impact means of production? Because we're talking about production, not just living in a place. And if it's really coming into a situation where having that second home can be used one way or another to impact production, and that should how? Isn't there like means by which in the system where collectively as a people, we just tax them out as tax?
Yeah, that's called the Pagovian tax. When you try, I think that falls into Pagovian tax, where you're trying to affect behavior. Oh no, I guess ownership isn't the same as behavior, is it? But again, if I see nothing wrong with having a beach home as long as there are no homeless people. And the idea is that are you collecting rent on it, or is your family using it? Is it environmentally sound? I think these are all the questions we have to address. And and by the way, Dominique, this is what we do here. None of us are experts necessarily or about this particular book, but we're trying to work these ideas out. It's about discussing and maybe taking something away from it that you hadn't thought of before. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I would argue that it's more about, I guess, how resources are distributed. And if someone wants to have 2 or 3 houses when, other people, there are people that don't have solid living, and it can be a process, that kind of that socialist transition. But I guess it would just be about using resources and distributing them like more evenly as needed, instead of, someone thinking that they deserve more because they did something. I don't know. That's what I would say. If it's, if it's resource, it goes with all resources too.
And Cole is asking, does everyone have a beach house that wants one? That was
Virginia and I have one.
Yeah, we have our beach mansions. I mean, houses. I'm just kidding. I do not. But yeah.
Yeah. Mark Fabian has his hand back up again. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, I just the way that I understand it, it wouldn't it have to do with the social aspect of it, of people that have more than what is necessary, and others that don't. So that's where the dacha would come into play, as to providing something for someone who doesn't have, that excess.
Right. Oh, Cheryl put a good comment in here. Her thoughts: a beach home deteriorates the environment. She in parentheses, she says Everglades impeding. A second home in my state raises the cost of fewer homes for families who need them. Our politicians want these wealthy, thinking they can tax them, but we all know that won't work. Yeah. And then Catherine asks, who is going to determine who has too much? Those are the kinds of, exactly the kinds of things that need to be worked out. Nobody wants a dictatorship that's arbitrary. All of these things need to be. We need a true democracy is what we need. That's my humble opinion.
Seems like the closest thing, to true democracy is socialism.
I believe that.
They have a say in the matter. Everybody kind of remember hearing people say, "Oh, mob rule," or "Well, you got to, the rule by many is not good," or something because you're idiots or whatever. But it's like, I mean, that would be the best way to do things, man. Is get the general consensus of what works best for everyone. And it seems weird, like you think politicians and powerful people and rich people like know better or something.
Anybody, when people talk about the lack of democracy and socialism, there's a podcast, Pearls of the Round Table, that's no longer in existence, but there was an episode about communist democracy, and I've given that link to a lot of people. I will bring it next. I will find it before the next meeting. I found it so interesting. I think people here will like it. So it's been 90 minutes, which is the perfect amount of time for a webinar or book club. And I think we've got a lot to think about. Does anybody else have anything they want to add or anything they want us to think about for next week?
Carol put something up in the chat real quick. Maybe we can hit that before we get out of here.
Yeah. Can you read it?
Yep. Carol says, I've seen rental properties from the other side. My father always had rental properties, both residential and commercial. They were small places. He was never liquid and still is. He reinvested in other properties. He did use the money to improve his own house. He never charged the rent he could have. He had people who were too poor to purchase a house. He had people who were put out of their own house ownership through divorce or death. He had students who were only living in the area for a short time. He's been stiffed on the rent to the tune of thousands. He had mortgages and insurance on those properties he provided a need where economics did. And, I think that's the main thing people need to understand is the idea of, having a socialist transition is to make sure that everybody gets these basic needs. Landlords would be obsolete, if everybody had housing. And I mean, I know there's, small people that I don't shame people too much if they're doing what they have to survive in this system. But the idea is that, we're going to start by making sure everybody has housing, making sure everybody has food, education, the basics. I would say now internet, that stuff is important too. And when everybody has the basics, I mean, I just can't see a scenario where somebody could become a landlord, I guess.
Or would need, or the Carol's just, first of all, I don't think socialism should be about punishing people. The only people that would be punished, as far as I'm concerned, are the people who are trying to continue to exploit, exploit the working class. This is not, she's not describing an exploitative relationship here. And again, the reason that Carol's father was doing this was to take care of himself and his family. And we're talking about building a society where your security doesn't depend on, on all of these things working out, and that the house being rented out and the people actually paying their rent and not stiffing him and the mortgages not. I mean, we're looking at a whole different world. But again, I think the transition should not involve punishing people.
Maybe punish some. But on that note,
Yeah, I really don't think that people like that who are
no,
just struggling to survive should be punished. Really?
no, I'm not. What I mean is, yeah, I understand people doing what they have to survive in the system, but I think there's some powerful people in powerful positions that it would
Yeah,
hurt
people
to
who are
if they
still
were
trying
punished.
to. Yeah,
Yeah.
people who
Oh,
are
I
trying
agree.
to exploit the working class. Absolutely.
Jamie Dimons and
Yes,
Bezos's.
exactly. We have one more session for this book, and then next week we will announce our next book club, which will begin probably 2 weeks later. Hopefully Esha will be leading the discussion. I also want to work with Carlos to do a webinar with him and RP Live on his book Fiat Socialism. But please remember, on Saturday morning we have our podcast Macro and Cheese, which will be coming out on Tuesday. Gosh, how could I forget? Tommy John and I and Jonathan also co-host Macro and Chill every Tuesday evening, where we discuss the most recent episode of Macro and Cheese. It's basically like this event. We listen and talk about it. This upcoming one is in defense of journalists and whistleblowers. And I think it's a really interesting episode. I think you guys will all like it. If you haven't listened yet, and if you haven't listened yet, still, please go get the link and share it and comment so that, we affect the algorithms. You can make a contribution. You can donate to Real Progressives by going to our website and hitting the donate button. Don't forget our Substack, realprogressives.substack.com. What else, Tommy John?
I think we covered it all.
Okay, everybody, see you Tuesday night at Macro and Chill. If you don't have the link, go to realprogressives.org and you'll see it right at the top of the page of, coming events. Macro and Chill Tuesday night, and then we'll see you here next Sunday.
Yeah. Have a good day, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you all.